Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens to your soul while you sleep? Many believe that the simple act of praying the Rosary before bed offers protection, but Padre Pio left us a warning that could completely change the way you view this practice. What happens spiritually when you drift off in the middle of your prayer? Are you truly protecting yourself? Or, without realizing it, are you leaving openings for spiritual attacks? Discover now what Padre Pio had to say about this seemingly harmless practice and how it might be affecting your life in ways you never imagined. Most people don't realize it, but the moment we sleep is also the moment when we are most spiritually vulnerable. It's when the mind rests that the spiritual world moves, which is why praying the Rosary before sleep has become such a powerful practice for many Christians. Padre Pio, who could see beyond what human eyes can perceive, always recommended this prayer as a protective shield against evil influences and invisible spiritual attacks. But there's a crucial detail that few know, and it can make all the difference. The Rosary is not just a prayer, it is a spiritual weapon. While the body rests, the soul continues its journey, and the prayer that resonated before sleep could be the very barrier that keeps nightmares, torments, and even spiritual disturbances at bay. There are accounts of people who, by adopting this practice, noticed changes in their dreams, felt a peace they had never known, and were even freed from nighttime spiritual pressures. But is it enough to just pray mechanically, without focus, to receive these graces? Padre Pio taught that true prayer is not merely repeating words, but diving into them with the heart. The danger of turning the Rosary into an unconscious habit is that it can lose its power. If you just repeat the Hail Marys without truly connecting with Jesus Christ and Our Lady, you may simply be uttering empty words. And this is where the warning lies. There is a right way to pray the Rosary before sleep, one that makes it truly effective. Have you ever stopped to think if you're doing it the right way? Padre Pio was always clear in stating that prayer before bed should not be a casual gesture, but a sincere and conscious offering. He knew that the soul didn't rest completely during the night, so the Rosary prayer should be more than a simple habit. For him, this moment should be one of deep reflection, of surrender to the Lord, and of true connection with the divine. When praying the Rosary, it wasn't just protection from evil, but a way to strengthen the soul to face whatever lay ahead. He knew that the night could bring temptations and spiritual challenges, and that prayer was the key to resisting them. But at the same time, Padre Pio taught that it wasn't a magical practice, as if praying the Rosary before bed was a formula to ensure a peaceful night. No, for him, the value of the Rosary was in genuine devotion. He said that it wasn't enough just to pray the Rosary mechanically. The heart needed to be involved, just as the mind needed to be. He believed that the presence of Jesus Christ in each Hail Mary and Our Father would bring an invisible strength, which was even more necessary for those seeking spiritual protection. Have you ever reflected on how your surrender in praying the Rosary can transform your night? However, many Christians make a simple yet impactful mistake. They sleep with the Rosary in their hands, but without full attention to what they're saying. It's as if they're doing God a favor, but without the sincere devotion He deserves. Padre Pio said it's better to pray less, but with more attention and love, than to pray a lot mechanically. The key is not in the quantity, but in the quality of the prayer. Have you ever thought about how you could give more attention and care to your Rosary before sleep? Many people have the habit of sleeping with the Rosary in their hands as a way to ensure a protected night, but this can be a spiritual trap if not done correctly. The most common mistake is to treat the Rosary merely as a physical object, as if it were some kind of talisman that guarantees protection, regardless of how you pray it. Padre Pio, in his wisdom, always warned that the value of the Rosary is not in how we hold it, but in the intention with which we use it. Sleeping with the Rosary in hand can be a way to express faith, but true spiritual protection comes from the inner attitude, from the prayer made with a sincere heart. It's important to understand that simply holding the Rosary while you sleep, without the necessary attention and devotion, may not yield the spiritual fruits we seek. In Padre Pio's view, the Rosary should be treated as a conversation with God, an intimate moment that requires full presence. If, upon sleeping, you limit yourself to just holding the Rosary without focus, it can weaken the depth of the prayer and turn the practice into an empty routine. A practical example would be thinking about any other important conversation you've had. If you talk to someone without listening to what they had to say, would that communication really have value? The same applies to prayer. So, what's the solution to this common mistake? Padre Pio suggested that, when praying the Rosary, one should give attention to each word, each mystery, each moment of reflection. He believed that, when falling asleep in prayer, the soul should remain in tune with God, not through mechanical gestures, but through a true act of faith. The next time you go to sleep with the Rosary, how about dedicating just a few minutes to really connect with the prayer? True spiritual strength is found in the heart that surrenders to prayer, not in the hands that merely hold the Rosary. During sleep, many don't realize that their souls continue to engage in spiritual battle. The Rosary, when prayed correctly, acts as a powerful shield that protects the faithful throughout the night. Padre Pio understood that while the body rests, the spiritual world remains active. He believed that by praying the Rosary, Christians invoked the protection of Our Lady, and she kept them safe from the forces of evil that try to infiltrate during sleep. This is a moment of invisible warfare, where the prayers said before bed can become the most effective line of defense against spiritual attacks, which often occur unnoticed. The power of the Rosary goes beyond the simple act of praying. It is a spiritual weapon that directly protects the soul. The spiritual world is a battlefield, and continuous prayer, like the Rosary, serves to strengthen our connection with God and prevent evil from affecting us while we are vulnerable. Padre Pio, with his experience and spiritual sensitivity, knew that this kind of protection was essential, especially for young Christians who felt more vulnerable to external temptations and pressures. He always encouraged constant prayer, showing that by keeping our focus on Christ, even while sleeping, we could block the malevolent advances. But what most people don't know is that true spiritual protection doesn't come just from praying mechanically, but from maintaining an attitude of surrender and trust. The Rosary then becomes not just a request for protection, but a moment of consecrating one's life to God. If you want to protect yourself spiritually, pray the Rosary with faith, knowing you are placing your trust in the hands of God and Our Lady. The true spiritual battle occurs when the soul remains alert, even while the body sleeps. What do you think? Have you noticed how prayer can transform your nights? Padre Pio, with his deep spiritual wisdom, always emphasized the importance of nighttime prayer. He didn't just recommend praying before sleep, but gave a specific warning to all Christians: do not sleep without being at peace with God. To him, prayer before sleep was a crucial moment because the soul remained active even while the body rested. He understood that if the mind wasn't purified by prayer, the spirit could be vulnerable to spiritual disturbances during the night. This advice from Padre Pio was, in fact, a prophetic warning for those who believed the Rosary could be recited anyway, without the proper discernment. In many of his testimonies, Padre Pio warned that sleeping without sincere prayer opened the doors to negative influences. He knew that if someone went to bed without truly being at peace with God, evil could act more easily. However, he also emphasized that the Rosary, when prayed with true faith, acted as an impenetrable barrier against the forces of evil. Padre Pio knew that the enemy of the soul does not rest, and that's why he encouraged the faithful to always be in prayer, seeking divine protection. This prophetic warning echoed at all times, not just for those who practiced the Rosary. So, what would be the way to be at peace with God as you sleep? Padre Pio suggested that, besides praying the Rosary, the faithful should reflect on their spiritual life before falling asleep, seeking inner reconciliation and peace of mind. The Rosary prayer then became not only a plea for protection but a way of purifying the soul, allowing the Christian to fall asleep with a peaceful heart, away from spiritual traps. What do you do before sleep to ensure your soul is at peace with God? During sleep, the soul continues its journey, and it's when we are most vulnerable to the spiritual world. The Bible teaches us that the battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and spiritual powers, which often act in the shadows, invisible to our eyes. Padre Pio knew this deeply, and that's why he warned his followers to stay vigilant, even while resting. While the body rests, the spirit can still be attacked by malignant forces, which try to steal the peace, serenity, and spiritual protection we seek. This is one of the reasons he recommended prayers like the Rosary before bed, so the soul would stay protected, even during rest. The spiritual world is vast, and during sleep, the soul exposes itself to different dimensions. There are reports of spiritual experiences, such as revealing dreams, visions, and even spiritual attacks while people sleep. Prayer, in this context, acts as a shield that prevents these negative influences from taking over the mind and heart. Padre Pio, with his mystical experience, knew that prayer before sleep not only protected the soul from attacks but also prepared it for what was to come, whether during the night or the following day. He saw prayer as a line of defense against the forces trying to divert the faithful from Christ's path. Therefore, while sleeping, the soul is not inactive. It can be at risk or under divine protection, depending on the spiritual preparation you made before falling asleep. The sincere prayer of the Rosary, instead of being just a routine, becomes a spiritual foundation to face any spiritual attack, whether during sleep or throughout the day. Have you ever thought about what happens to your soul when you fall asleep, without the protection of true prayer? The Rosary can be your protection at this crucial moment. When you pray the Rosary, you are not just praying, you are establishing a direct connection with the divine. Padre Pio believed that the Rosary functioned as a spiritual bridge between earth and heaven, creating a communication channel through which the faithful could touch God's heart. This act of faith is not limited to repeated words but transforms into a divine exchange, where God's grace flows to those who pray with devotion. When you recite the Rosary with a sincere heart, you are, in fact, opening a door for God's presence to enter your life. It's this deep connection that makes the Rosary so powerful, especially before sleep, when the soul is more susceptible to external influences. The practice of the Rosary, especially when prayed with an open heart and focused mind, becomes an experience that transcends time and space. Padre Pio knew that by praying the Rosary, a person not only drew closer to Our Lady but also to Jesus Christ, the mediator between man and God. He saw the Rosary as a means for heaven's graces to pour down onto earth, blessing and protecting those who surrender to this practice with faith. He always said that when praying, a person was not merely asking for something but positioning themselves to receive God's will. The power of the Rosary is amplified when understood as more than a simple devotion. It is an opportunity to experience the real presence of God in your life, especially when done before sleep, in the stillness of the night. Each Hail Mary and Our Father becomes an act of adoration, a way to connect with heaven, ensuring that the soul remains under divine protection through the night. What do you think about viewing your prayer as a true bridge to heaven? How could this change the way you pray each day? During sleep, the soul continues its journey, and this may include moments of vulnerability. Dreams and visions are ways the spiritual world can communicate with humanity, either to bring divine revelations or, in other cases, to disrupt a person's peace. Padre Pio, with his deep spiritual sensitivity, understood this reality and always said that the Rosary could create a barrier between the faithful and these spiritual influences, whether good or evil. He believed that by praying the Rosary before sleep, the faithful were preparing for a peaceful night's rest, protected from spiritual attacks and allowing dreams and visions to come only from God. Spiritual attacks, often manifested through nightmares or pressures during sleep, should not be underestimated. Padre Pio had a clear understanding that these moments of weakness were exploited by evil forces to try and destabilize the Christian's faith. But the Rosary, when prayed with sincerity and intent, acted as a divine protection. He saw the Rosary as a spiritual shield that surrounded the person in such a way that, even while sleeping, they were immune to these attacks. He taught that if the Rosary were prayed correctly, there would be no space for evil to enter, even in the world of dreams. Clearly, the Rosary should not be seen only as a defense against evil, but also as an opportunity to grow spiritually, even during sleep. When prayer is offered with devotion, it becomes an open door for receiving divine visions and dreams, which can bring wisdom, direction, and even personal revelations from God. Thus, when you sleep, you're not just seeking protection, but also the possibility of receiving valuable spiritual insights. Have you ever thought that your dreams could be more than mere images but a way through which God speaks to you? The Rosary might be the key to this experience. A common mistake among those who pray the Rosary before bed is falling asleep during the prayer. This often happens due to fatigue or distraction and can generate a sense of guilt, as if the prayer hasn't been completed properly. Padre Pio understood this situation well, and in his teachings, he always emphasized that God knows the heart of the faithful. He knew that, even if the body fell asleep before finishing the Rosary, if the intent was sincere, God would not see it as a failure, but as a genuine surrender, even if unconscious. The important thing, according to Padre Pio, was that the person sincerely made an effort to fulfill their devotion. So what to do when you fall asleep before finishing the Rosary? The first thing is not to feel guilty. God knows our human limitations, and even in sleep, His grace is present. If you realize that you fell asleep, wake up, if possible, and continue the prayer. Otherwise, trust that, even without completing the prayer fully, your intent and effort were recognized by God. Padre Pio said that perseverance on the spiritual path was more important than perfection in executing a practice. What matters is that, sincerely, you surrendered to the Lord through prayer. However, to avoid this from happening frequently, a good practice would be to prepare for prayer with more attention, perhaps by creating a peaceful environment before beginning. The Rosary is a way to establish direct communication with God, and the more attentive and focused you are, the more effective the prayer will be. Have you ever tried to set aside a calmer time before bed, without hurry or distractions, to ensure that your prayer is made with full devotion? This simple change can transform your prayer experience and prevent you from falling asleep before finishing the Rosary. Our Lady, in her apparitions throughout history, has always made powerful promises to those who venerate her with devotion, and the Rosary, as one of her most cherished forms of prayer, is no exception. Many don't know, but one of Our Lady's deepest promises is to protect those who pray the Rosary, especially before sleep, when the soul is more exposed. Padre Pio, in his teachings, shared with his followers that this promise of divine protection was not just symbolic but real, and he experienced it in his own life. When praying the Rosary, a person places themselves under the maternal protection of Mary, who intercedes with Jesus to guarantee peace and spiritual protection, even during the night. When someone prays the Rosary before sleep, it's as if they are closing the door to any negative influence that might try to enter. Our Lady's promise is clear. Those who trust in her, especially in the practice of the Rosary, have special protection against the forces of evil. Padre Pio knew that, by trusting in this divine protection, Christians could sleep peacefully, knowing their souls were guarded, not only while the body rested but also during the spiritual attacks that could occur in the world of dreams. He always emphasized that, by praying with faith, a person not only protects themselves but also brings deep relief to their soul. But this protection is not automatic. Our Lady promises to protect, but she also asks that the faithful pray with a sincere heart, with the intention of surrendering to God. It's not about a mechanical prayer, but a true act of faith. The promise is fulfilled when there is a genuine desire to place oneself under Mary's protection and to live according to the teachings of Jesus Christ. Have you sought to live this true surrender in your prayer? How could this transform the way you pray, especially before sleep? Often, when we fall asleep with the Rosary in our hands, the prayer is interrupted, but the symbolism of this action goes beyond simple physical rest. The sleeping Rosary, when a person falls asleep while praying, carries deep spiritual meaning. Padre Pio, in his experience, understood that prayer did not end with sleep, but that the soul, still in communion with God, continued its spiritual journey, even while the body rested. The sleeping Rosary then becomes a sign of surrender and trust in God, a sign that, even in rest, a person is being guarded by a divine protection that transcends human consciousness. The prayer, even if interrupted, remains active in the spiritual world. What many don't know is that, when falling asleep during the Rosary, the faithful don't lose the graces that prayer would bring. Padre Pio taught that, when prayer is made with sincerity, even if the body sleeps, the soul continues to be in contact with God. The sleeping Rosary is, therefore, an expression of faith that goes beyond human understanding, a demonstration that surrender to God knows no limits. It's as if, when falling asleep with the Rosary in hand, the Christian is symbolically surrendering their soul to God to be cared for and protected, without the need for more words, but with a heart confident in divine intervention. But the true power of the sleeping Rosary is only revealed when a person understands that sleep is not a time of disconnection, but a continuation of prayer. True faith doesn't fade with tiredness. On the contrary, it strengthens when we recognize that even in rest, God guards us. How can you apply this understanding to your daily life, especially when praying the Rosary before sleep? Have you thought about how this can change the way you approach your prayer, even when sleep arrives and interrupts the continuity of words? Throughout his life, Padre Pio was witness to many spiritual mysteries and always knew that sincere prayer is one of the most powerful ways to strengthen faith and keep the soul protected. For those who have the habit of sleeping while praying, he left a final recommendation: never pray out of obligation, but out of love and devotion. This is a deep message, one that goes beyond simply holding the Rosary or repeating words. True prayer comes from the heart, and even if you fall asleep during the prayer, the important thing is that your intention to pray is genuine. For Padre Pio, what mattered most was the sincerity of the prayer, not the time or perfection of execution. Padre Pio knew that, in modern life, many people felt pressured by routine and fatigue, which could even affect the quality of their prayers. However, he always stressed that, when praying, the heart should be present, regardless of physical condition. When you sleep praying, the prayer doesn't end but continues to work in your soul, protecting it from negative influences and helping to strengthen your connection with God. This final recommendation from Padre Pio is an invitation for each person to reveal their faith in a true and unhurried way, understanding that prayer is a dialogue with God, and that He knows the heart of each one. Therefore, Padre Pio's recommendation for those who sleep praying is clear. Never pray out of obligation, but out of love, and trust that your devotion will be heard, even on the most tiring nights. By falling asleep in prayer, you are allowing God to care for your soul and for Mary to intercede for you. This daily and silent surrender may be the key to a more spiritually fulfilling life. How have you surrendered in prayer before sleeping? Has your practice been an expression of true love or just a routine to ease your conscience? Now that you know Padre Pio's warnings and teachings on praying the Rosary before sleep, it's time to reflect. Has your prayer practice been made with total surrender and attention? What can you change, starting today, to ensure that each prayer you make is a true spiritual shield and not just a routine? Don't let superficiality take over your faith. What you've learned here might be the key to a more protected and spiritually stronger life. If this content made a difference for you, don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the channel to keep learning more about how to strengthen your spirituality. Turn on notifications and don't miss the upcoming teachings that could transform your life.